Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be going over Chapter 6, Congress. This hopefully won't take too long. All right, let's get started. Roots of Congress. Congress is broken up into a bicameral legislation, which means two. Bicameral means two. We have an upper house, which is the Senate, and the lower house, which is the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is based off of direct elections, always has. They get elected every 2 years, and there is a max of 435 members in the House. That number is broken up based off of population size, and that number is redistributed among each state's population. In the upper house, we have the Senate, which that originally was not directly elected by the people, but has become due to the 17th Amendment. Each state receives 2 senator positions, regardless of the population size, and each senator serves a 6-year term. We have the 2 Senate max number, regardless of population. That first came up with when we had the smaller states and the larger state populations, when the states were first being formed through Congress, Continental Congress. So we had one that was a direct election, so that way larger states were having equal power or more power than the smaller states, but then the smaller states were also making up that power through the Senate, so that way there was a clear balance between the two. Congress has the authority to make laws, raise and spend revenues, declare war, raise an army and navy, coin money, regulate commerce, establish federal courts, set forth laws on immigration, neutralization, and then at the end you'll see right there it says, as well as make laws that are deemed necessary and proper. The authorities, the powers that Congress has that are directly listed out is called enumerated powers. Those are explicitly stated within the Constitution. Over here we have implied powers, which is the necessary and proper laws that are being implemented as needed. Down here I put in caps, no bill or proposed law can be passed without the consent of both houses of Congress. So both the Senate and the House of Representatives have to approve it in order for it to become a law. Impeachment is initiated by the House of Representatives. They're in charge of saying, oh, this president needs to be impeached, this executive officer needs to be impeached, and the Senate is in charge of regulating those trials. Members of Congress. Within members of Congress, there are constituents that elect or nominate members to represent them. In time, we've seen these members to be more educated, white, males, and extremely wealthy. This is just a trend we've seen over time among our representatives. Nearly all congressional members are millionaires over the age of 60. So oftentimes you'll hear members of Congress being called the Millionaires Club because there is a trend of them becoming extremely wealthy and controlling that. That brings up questions of, is there an accurate representation of the people within Congress? And we said here, due to incumbency, which is high re-election rates and high costs that come with campaigning. It is very expensive to campaign to become a representative, and that funding oftentimes comes through lobbyists, interest groups who are helping to pay those costs. So high re-election rates occurs when millionaires are able to afford funding their own campaigns and not relying on lobbyists and other interest groups. It's very convenient for them. Members of Congress represent different districts. These districts are constantly changing in order to accurately reflect the population size and demographics. After passing the Voting Rights Act, gerrymandering has become more difficult to perform, as discriminating based on district is now illegal in order to make races more competitive and fair for minorities. So there used to be a lot of gerrymandering where the districts were being drawn in order to favor a group that's very wealthy, to suppress the groups of minorities. So through the Voting Rights Act, there were ways to implement the elimination of discriminating. By one of the examples is it had to be one continuous straight line among the districts. You couldn't break up sections to make a district. This was put into place so that way everyone is getting their, or in theory, to get everyone's voice heard and to make sure that the races are becoming more competitive and one person is not overpowering an entire section of the district or state. How Congress is organized. The House is broken up into minority and majority parties. Each party conducts a caucus. We see these through conferences between the two different parties to review and create committees within the House. So within Congress and the two different houses, Senate and House of Representatives, we also have minority and majority parties. The minority party is the one that has the less number of members within Congress, and then the majority party is the one with obviously more. The Speaker of the House is a member of Congress that comes from the majority party. They have the most influence. So it's President, Vice President, then Speaker of the House. Then we have majority and minority leaders. These are next in line after the Speaker of the House. They schedule and propose legislative debates. So if something is being debated, they're the ones to put it and schedule it into the floor meetings. Republican and Democratic whips. They keep things in line. They're going to make sure that they're following the schedule and sticking with the planned meeting. Presiding officer, president, there. So the presiding officer is typically the vice president who fills this position, and they only vote on issues if there is a tie. If the vice president is not able to make it, then that is where we see the president pro tempore, I want to make sure I'm saying that right, which is a senior senator that fills in only in the absence of the VP within the Senate. Leadership teams. The minority leaders and whips from both parties elect teams that act similar to the House of Representatives in functions for the Senate. So leadership teams are basically the same thing as Democratic whips, but for the Senate. So Democratic whips is specifically for the House of Representatives. Presiding officer is for the Senate. Leadership teams is for the Senate, but acts as the whips for the Senate. Committee systems. Committees are important as they address and construct bill differentiations. So the 4 types of committees is standing. These are where bills are referred, the first place that they go to be looked at and considered. Then we have joint, which is a standing in committee, plus members from both houses, both House of Representatives and Senate. They conduct special studies and focus on public attention matters. So any type of issues that we're seeing specifically being shown in the media, this is typically coming from the joint committees. Conference is special joint. This is a special group that comes together to look at differences in bills that are passed between the House and the Senate. So oftentimes you'll see 2 bills that are quite similar being passed in the House and Senate, and they are the ones that are going to look and see how are they similar, how are they different, how can we make a compromise. Then we have the Select Committee. This is a temporary committee that is appointed for specific purposes. That just depends and varies. The House of Committee of Rules. They are in charge of the lawmaking process. They create a rule which is basically the date, the time allotted for a bill to be up for debate on the House floors. They also allow that time to be for any amendments to be proposed. Bills with a closed rule, however, cannot be amended. There can be no amendments added to that. We have discharge petition. This is when a majority of the House signs to force a bill out. So if a discharge petition happens, which is very rare, it can be forced out of the House. Here we have the House acts more of a specialist, similar to the President's cabinet on issues, whereas the Senate acts as a generalist on topics. So oftentimes you'll see representatives who are specialized in specific areas or are passionate about specific topics, whereas Senates need to be more broad and general and represent an array of issues. Committee systems. We have committee chair. They hold a lot of power, and because they hold so much power, sometimes we can see lobbyists, interest groups targeting the committee chair because they know that they have direct influence within Congress. So what is the committee chair doing? They select subcommittees. So within the committees that address certain issues, there might be subcommittees that focus in on research and how can legislation become passed within that committee. So they select the subcommittees, they call the meetings, and they recommend majority leaders to be able to sit in on conferences. So committee chairs hold the power to kill a bill by refusing to schedule hearings. That is a big deal. So if you're not on good terms with the committee chair and you're not being able to work with them, they're not going to schedule you on the meetings, which means your bill will not become passed. So they hold a lot of power. Please keep that in mind. Yes, I said that they're targeted by lobbyists due to the power they hold. This position used to be based off of seniority, which is not a great thing when we're wanting to see change within Congress and nothing's happening. So that was taken away. Now it is based off of interviews done by party leaders who they feel are potentially ready to become committee chairs, and they serve 6-year terms. Committee membership. This reflects the party's distribution within the chambers as they choose to focus in on certain committee issues they will address. This is done in order to help ensure re-election as well as strengthen their influence by utilizing their expertise. So we have committee memberships. They're going to focus in on specific issues that they're passionate about, because if they're able to get their bills passed through when it comes time for re-election, they're going to be able to say, look what I was able to do. I got this bill passed. I'm passionate about this. So being a part of committee membership is very, very important and vital to those who are wanting to serve again. Powers of Congress, passing a law. It looks like a lot. I promise it's not that bad. So I'm going to just basically take you through the steps in order to get a law passed. We have 2 bills typically that'll occur. One will be in the House and one will be in the Senate. And these typically have sponsors and co-sponsors to show Congress that, hey, this bill is really important to a lot of members of Congress, so we need to get this passed. So you'll see sponsors and co-sponsors. That's like the first step. Then we have the bill. Once it has sponsors, will be sent to the clerk of chambers, which then gives it a number and a letter. So that will kind of like codify it. So H stands for House, S stands for Senate. Once that is done, the bill is then printed and distributed to committees for consideration. So we talked about how there's specific committees within the House and the Senate. It is then sent there for them to look over it, research it, see if that is something that they are wanting. From there, it can even be sent to the subcommittees within that committee in order for there to be research and amendments that they may want to propose to that bill. So it can either get approved or denied there. If it gets approved, then it'll move on to the chair, and there they will decide whether they're going to have hearings on it or not. Hearings are very, very, very important because they provided an opportunity for people that are for or against it to speak out about the bill. And from there, that bill can be approved or denied. So that's really important to have. If it's approved, then it will return back to the full committee. And then there, they'll make any revisions that they want to make any amendments before it hits the floor. If it's approved, then it'll lead to the floor. Once it's on the floor, they can choose to have a committee. It's called a committee of the whole, where only 100 members of of Congress will be there to listen and suggest any amendments before taking a vote on it. I think that it's probably best that they have a committee of the whole because, like we said before, Congress, that at least for the House, there is 435 members, and it can be difficult to get all of their opinions on what amendments should be added to get a vote. So having 100 members really solidifies the number. So for there, they either approve or deny it. If it is approved, then it is passed to the Senate for consideration. This is where it can get kind of tricky and the process becomes really long because in the Senate, they can either do a hold or filibuster. A hold is where a senator will ask further information or research about the bill before it hits the floor. A filibuster is when a senator is able to kind of have these long speeches and unlimited debates within or about this bill. And so then the unlimited debate, that kind of really prolongs the process. In order to end a filibuster, 60 senators must motion to sign a cloture, is I believe how you say it, which restricts the debate to no more than 30 hours. So they have to get 60 senators to agree, like, hey, this has got to end. And then if that is approved, they can only spend 30 hours on this debate. Powers of Congress. Then, if that gets approved and approved from there, the two different bills that were approved in the House and the Senate must come to a compromise to make sure, like it is one bill, one solidified thought. And oftentimes, if they can't find a compromise, it just ends there. If they are able to come to a compromise, then the chamber will have one final vote on it. And once there has been a compromise made, no amendments or changes can be made to that bill. If it is approved, then it is sent to the president, who has 10 days to respond to it. And there they have four choices. One, they can sign the bill and it becomes a law. They can veto the bill, which typically happens when the executive branch is a different party than the majority Congress. So if the bill is vetoed, it is sent back to Congress where they can have a 2/3 vote in favor, which will override the president's veto. But getting a 2/3 vote is extremely difficult within the chamber. The third option they have is to wait 10 days, and if there is no response, it immediately becomes a law without the president's signature. And the fourth option is for Congress to adjourn before the 10 days, which allows the president to have a pocket veto. And basically what that means is it's going to have to go back to Congress for the next session, and it has to restart the whole entire process again. But that is the process to passing a law. So you can see that the framers from way back at the beginning didn't want passing a law to become easy because then it can infringe on people's freedoms and liberties. And that was not something that they wanted, especially because they came from a monarchy that was suppressing their expression. So they made it very difficult for laws to become passed, so that way it wasn't infringing on other people's liberties. We're almost done, I promise. Budgetary functions. We have the Budget and Accounting Act of 1921. This requires the president to submit a budget to Congress. It has to include spendings, projections, and proposals for the next year. And then Congress, in turn, can look at those spending budgets and say, no, I want this much to go here and this much to go here. But they can do that, but they cannot increase the total spending from the proposed budget by the president. The Congressional Budget Act of 1974 was then put into place, and the bills and resolutions established levels of spending for the federal government during the fiscal year. These programs and policies act as a representation of the goals of Congress and the president. So the reason that Congress has to go back and look at the president's budget is because it's a representation of both Congress and the presidential group. It's going to represent what it is that our government is wanting to focus in on this year. So it is very, very important that there is kind of an agreement between the two. Reconciliation. This was a special process added into the Congressional Budget Act of 1974. This allows for controversial issues affecting the budget to be up for consideration. However, the debate is limited to 20 hours in order to kind of just weed out filibusters, which is great. All right, if Congress doesn't make initial actions on the budget resolution by April 15th, then the federal government may shut down. This is because it's really important that the federal government kind of has like a unified plan for the following year. However, both parties in Congress have vowed to prioritize budget reform and reduce the national debt. This was an agreement between both Republican and Democratic parties that it is a priority of theirs to make sure that as a nation, we are doing our best to limit debt and to allocate money appropriately. Pork and programmatic request. Pork. I like to think it's super meaty. It's like it's a big hunk. So what does that mean in government? Legislation that allows representatives to bring money and jobs to their district in the form of public work programs, military base, and programs. These are real life, tangible things that representatives are able to put into communities. So we call it pork because it's just something that's there, it's in your face, you're seeing the real impacts within your community. So a lot of representatives want this because they can say that and bring it up in next re-election, be like, look, I brought these jobs into your district, I gave you these programs. It's really good for them when they're wanting to be re-elected. Then we have programmatic requests, which are federal funds designated for specific projects within the state and congressional districts. So this money is coming from the government, and it's providing all this. So they really, really need to fight to be able to fund these programs within there by putting in those requests. So this is really a big deal, just so that way its constituents are seeing real life implications in their own communities. Congress oversight power. So what is oversight power? This is important because it holds the executive branch, which, keep in mind, is the presidential group, that's the executive branch, responsible for delegating authority. Hearings are used to determine if they're enforcing and interpreting laws as intended. Congress is able to gather information on what it is the executive branch is wanting to focus in on and make change during that year, during their whole entire terms. The executive budget and intentions must be justifiable before the committee. They also serve to improve the administration. So obviously Congress is going to use their checks and balances to make sure that the executive branch is following through with what it is they're saying they're wanting to accomplish. The oversight powers Congress holds are, and I've kind of put them here, it's 4 things. We have war power resolutions, congressional review, confirmation of presidential appointees, impeachment. Let's break it down real quick. War power resolution, which allows the president to deploy troops into action with congressional approval, or he can send them off without congressional approval if we are being directly attacked, whether that be on territories, troops are being directly attacked, or the U.S. Country is being attacked. However, the president needs to be in contact with Congress. Congress needs to be aware of what is happening. Congressional review. Nullify agency regulations. Nullify means to invalidate agency regulations by passing a joint resolution, legislative disapproval signed by the president. Wow. That was a lot to take in. In order to invalidate a regulation that has been put in place, Congress would have to create a joint resolution that is signed both by Congress members and the president, which is really hard to do, especially if there is a difference in parties between the two. But it is an oversight power that Congress does hold. Confirmation of presidential appointees. So Congress is broken up into the House of Representatives and Senators. When a position needs to be filled within like a certain state, the president can ask for senatorial courtesy. So that is when a senator will be able to either share their support or block a nomination through the blue slip process. So many senators from that state, let's say it was Texas, would go ahead and say, yes, I support this nomination that the president is making, or I don't support this this nominee that the president is making. Impeachment. Impeachment is the process of charging someone from the executive branch for misconducts, breaking laws, and such. So there I put some past presidents who have been charged with impeachment and what it was they were charged with. Keep in mind the House of Representatives in charge of investigating impeachment, whereas the Senate conducts the trials. How members of Congress make decisions. 3 different ways. We have a trustee, which listens to the opinions of their constituents and votes with their best judgment in mind. Delegates, on the other hand, vote in the ways in which their constituents want, regardless of how they personally view the topic at hand. And then last, we have politico, which acts as either a trustee or delegate, depending on the situation. Clearly, no political party is solely based on one or the other. Oftentimes, it's a combination of both. Now, breaking it up, how do they make decisions? There is 5 different people that your representatives must keep in mind, or oftentimes keep in mind, when voting on issues, because like we said, it's very expensive to be able to fund and run for these positions of power. So there are certain people who influence the ways in which a representative will vote. Political parties. There are incentives to being affiliated with a specific party. However, there is also consequences. If you are a part or affiliated with a specific party, there are responsibilities you must uphold when they are wanting you to lean a certain way. And if you do not follow through with that, there are things on the line, whether that be re-election, committee assignments, financial support, that are on the line. It's so oftentimes how the way in which their political parties are wanting them to vote is in the forefront of their minds. Next, constituents. These are people who are directly electing them. Excuse me. These are people who are directly electing them, us, the people. We are constituents. We are the forefront of the mind all the time because we are the ones electing them. Another thing to keep in mind is oftentimes they may be torn on being able to satisfy their constituents, especially on issues of abortion, in a place where there's an equal number of their voters being pro-choice or pro-life, and they're voting on an issue of abortion, they're only going to satisfy one and another one is not going to be happy. So that is something that they must keep in mind, especially when they are wanting to be reelected. Caucuses and colleagues. Colleagues. So obviously, representatives cannot be completely knowledgeable on every single issue that is coming up within the House floor or the Senate floor. So they'll rely on their colleagues in order to inform them on issues. However, sometimes that can be known as log rolling because one representative may say, hey, if you vote yes on my bill that I'm trying to get passed, that when you have a bill that you're wanting to get passed, I will do the same. That is known as log rolling. It happens quite often. So colleagues and caucuses are always on the forefronts of their mind as well. Next, we have interest groups, lobbyists, political action committees. Political action committees is also known as PAC, so keep that in your mind. They can provide research and statistics to support or oppose the positions on an issue. Moreover, these groups can provide representatives with direct supplies, whether that be they're producing, pins or buttons or whatnot to get their name being heard. They could provide volunteers, they provide publicity, and sometimes they can even fund their campaigns. So that is also on the forefront of the mind, because that is where some of them are getting their information. That is where they're getting their support. So that is always also on their forefront of their mind. Then we have lastly, staff and support agencies. The people working within their group, the people working with them have a direct line to the representatives. So they're going to be able to influence them in the ways in which they vote, because their employees are becoming so knowledgeable on the same issues that the representatives are looking at. So those are the 5 people that come into mind when representatives are making a decision. Balancing constitutional powers. This is, I believe, our last slide, so good job for making it this far. I hope it's helpful. I'm gonna get better at doing this, I promise. Excuse me. Congress and the executive. Remember, Congress is broken up into 2 parts, the Senate and the House of Representatives. And the executive branch is, what you would know as the presidential group, VP, President, his cabinet, their cabinet, I'm sorry. Okay, Congress controls the amount of power the executive branch holds. That's baseline, what you need to know. Congress can control that, take away powers. Remember, they have enumerated powers and implied powers. So Congress is big. They're the big guys. Congress and the judiciary. Judiciary, Supreme Court. And then Congress, we know, is the Senate and the House of Representatives. Laws must be approved by the court, but Congress ultimately has the power to determine the number of judges or each court's boundaries. So although Supreme Court is ultimately going to enact the laws, Congress has the ability to take away and provide powers back to the court. So if the court oversteps the constitutional interpretations, a lot of times Congress will go back and be like, hey, no, sorry. Congress and the people. Keep in mind, I put there popular sovereignty. The people grant the government the power to govern over them. So over time, we've recently seen people's loss of faith within Congress. And when that happens, it starts to delegitimize the entire system. So Congress really, during these times, need to pay back attention to who it is that is in their forefront of their minds when they are voting, because the people are ultimately putting these representatives into power. Just another thing to keep in mind. I'm going to check the next slide, but I believe we are done. Yes, that is it. I hope this is helpful. If it is, I'm glad you were able to gain something from this. I'd like to keep it going. I really enjoyed being able to do this. Have a good evening.